Ladies and gentlemen, the next President of the United States, Mayor Buttigieg.
Thank you so much for the support. Thank you for joining us. And thank you for caring about the future of this country enough to take action about it. It is almost exactly 1 year since we started this effort. An exploratory committee with 4 people on staff in an office space in South Bend, roughly the size of the stage where I'm standing, with no big email list, no big senator's pack, a personal fortune of literally thousands of dollars to work with. But this idea that we would be well served if we refuse to accept the way that things are working in our politics right now, refuse to try to play this president's game on his terms or go on his show, but rather take one last look at that show and change the channel to something better for us. And against all the odds, and against a lot of the expectations, we have now come to this point. And it's thanks to you. It's thanks to our supporters who believe in this message, who believe in the ideas and the values of this campaign, those rules of the road you just heard about, and are living them. And because of that, we are now on our way to a victory in the Iowa caucuses. Yesterday was what we call a 4-state day. Woke up in South Carolina, connected with some supporters in Boston, campaigned in New Hampshire, and then by the time I hit the pillow, we were here in Illinois. So it's strange to think that for the next 9 days, I will be in the same state the whole time, but that's exactly where I need to be, and I'm so thankful to you. Many of you have visited Iowa as part of this campaign. Some of you will soon. And if you have, you know the energy there is extraordinary. And the commitment and the seriousness that voters are bringing to their choice that they're about to make is remarkable. And I'm seeing the very same faces there that I saw 6 months ago, turning up at events and then saying things like, "You seem good, you're in my top 7, let's see how this goes." And now they're in decision mode. They are ready to pick their nominee. And what we are seeing is that there are not only our fellow Democrats, but quite a few independents and a striking number of what I like to call future former Republicans ready to join this movement. Everyone I meet in Iowa and across the country is ready for that day that I always talk about when I begin my speeches with voters. That first time that the sun comes up over Lake Michigan and Donald Trump is no longer the president of the United States. What we've seen is an awareness that we have to be ready for that day. Not only do we have to make sure that day comes sooner rather than later, can't come soon enough, in fact, but also ask ourselves the question of then what? And remember that in order to win and in order to deserve to win, we've got to be prepared to govern. And in order to govern well, we've got to be ready to unify this nation, to heal this nation, and do it in a way that is consistent with getting big things done, because those problems will be waiting for us just 1 year more serious than they are right now. From climate to gun violence, to the racial and economic inequality in this country, to the simple fact that while we are told to be happy with the conditions of our economy, more and more people I meet are fighting just to hold on to what they've got. And if there's one thing that the campaign process brings out, it's that you encounter people, right and left, who remind you what's at stake, who pull the stakes of this election off the newspaper pages and into real life. I believe that politics is about our everyday lives. It's how I got into politics. It's why I care. As somebody who saw how healthcare affected my own family, as somebody whose own city was brought to its knees by mismanagement in Washington and in corporate decisions, and then got right back on its feet because we believed in each other. As somebody whose marriage exists by a single vote on the United States Supreme Court. And now I'm meeting people who remind me what's at stake on the ground, in the most unlikely places. I got a question about border policy from a teenager in Emmitsburg, as conservative and rural and areas you will find in Iowa, who raised her hand to ask me what we were going to do about family separation. Not because she's a policy buff, but because her father walked out on their family a few years ago. She had the courage to share this with a room full of people, because it is why she knew exactly what happens when a family gets separated. She already has the moral imagination to link her experience to that of a 6-year-old Salvadoran boy she's never met 1,000 miles away, and know what he's up against, and know that in some way through the political process she can be part of the solution that knits everybody together. I had a young man in Shenandoah on the other end of the state, equally conservative, rural area, raise his hand and ask how farms could be at the forefront of dealing with climate change, because he wanted to see his rural community win in what we've got to do to get ahead of the climate crisis, and wanted to know about solutions. I'm constantly encountering Americans with the moral authority of those not yet even old enough to vote. I'm looking at Max and Brooke and Jackson over here with their parents, who remind us of what is at stake, both in making sure we support the most vulnerable among us, and even more importantly, making sure we unlock what they can bring in order to make us and our nation better off. That's what's at stake in this election. But you already know that because you're here. And so the thing I'm asking of you is to spread that among those you know. To hit the road, to call people in your life, to reach out to them, knowing that the truth is the most effective thing for breaking through cynicism and calling somebody into the process is not whether they see a speech from me. It's whether somebody in your life reaches out to you and says what this campaign means to them. That's the thing that makes the biggest difference. And that's what each of you can do. In addition to the generous support that you've given to make it possible for us to have those organizers on the ground and to be traveling across these United States. In addition to what you can do, knocking on doors if you feel like it. And I can't promise you it'll be warm, but I can promise you it'll be exciting. So many of you have heard me give my stump speech in your own backyards or in your own neighborhoods, so I'm not gonna continue with a monologue. I'm gonna ask you to help welcome somebody who's been a great friend in this campaign and one of the minds shaping our healthcare policy, who has the famous fishbowl. We gathered up questions so that we can have a conversation, and she's gonna guide this discussion. So please welcome to the stage one of the architects of Medicare for All Who Want It, Crystal Gary.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is wonderful to be here, and I will not waste any time in getting to the questions, because I know those of you who ask questions are anxious to hear what the mayor has to say. All right, this first question is from Susan. She says, Trump has eliminated almost all of our environmental protections. I have personally been adversely affected by continuous discharges of cancer-causing chemicals into the water and air. U.S. Steel claims they haven't really broken any laws, which at this point is probably true. If elected, what will you do to reverse the effects of these health hazards and others like them taking place daily around our country?
And if that's your question, give a shout so I can be looking toward you. There you are. Thank you for coming, and thank you for lifting up environmental justice. First of all, personnel is policy. So when I'm president, we're going to have someone in charge of the EPA who believes in protecting the environment and believes in climate change. And yes, we have got to act on the rollbacks of standards for water, standards for air. We are learning more about how vulnerable we are to the pollution that is happening. Not just the dangers of climate change, but things that affect our health at every turn. So we should have more, not less, tools in order to deal with it. And that's a question of legislation, yes, but it's also a question of making sure that the administration has the resources that it needs. It's also critically important that we do this with a view toward justice. It is a constant path that Black and Latino communities and other historically excluded and disadvantaged communities are on the front lines of coming to harm, whether it's from industrial pollution or disproportionate vulnerability to the effects of climate change. And it's why we will put equity at the heart of our strategies on environmental justice and environmental improvement going forward. This is we've seen it in our own community, and what we've seen is often the funds don't follow the enforcement. We've got to make sure we're actually ready to commit the funds to do the cleanups that have to happen. And this is one example of many, many, many issues where we should remember that there is a powerful American majority wanting to get this done. Not only do a majority of Americans want a new and better president, there's a lot of folks who agree on what we're against. There's actually a bigger American majority for what we're for. And it's everything from higher wages and making sure we got paid family leave and better health care to the kinds of environmental protection you were asking about. The American people want this. Now we got to get a majority of the American Congress to actually reflect the majority of the American people. And that's where presidential leadership.
Mayor Pete, I have a question for you, Mayor Pete. How will you advise a transgender, queer, or non-binary teen who's disowned by their wealthy, homophobic parents and therefore cannot afford college because you oppose universal free public education and the majority of voters do?
Oh, I have great news for you. That person will get free college under my plan. What we are doing is basing it on somebody's ability to pay. Now, if you are in the top 10% by income, I am going to have to ask you to pay your own tuition. I just need those tax dollars. And I think this is a pretty good way forward. Matter of fact, none other than Bernie Sanders believed this is the right thing to do a couple of years ago. So I think this is a great area for us to come together with a common sense solution that targets our dollars on those who most need it.
Okay. All
right! The next question is from Maria. If you had to pick one word to inspire our next generation to find the way forward as adult citizens of our nation, what would it be?
Belonging. This campaign is about belonging. Look, we've got to recognize what we're up against in terms of policies and in terms of tone. The tone that this president has set for this country, the way that he talks to the American people, but increasingly the way the American people are talking to each other. When we share the same values, when we share values in terms of love of country, that has to be based on the awareness that if we're serious about love of country, that's not just reflected in chest thumping of a military parade. It is impossible to love a country if you hate half of the people in it. Our country's made of people. Who have regard for one another, even or especially when we don't see things exactly the same way. And we have got to remember at a time like this, that building that sense of belonging is a life or death issue. You want to deal with mental health and addiction? Consider the sense of belonging that people are self-medicating to deal with because they don't have it. if we want to deal with what is broken in our political system, let's make sure we have established a common reality that we don't have right now. This is what national service is about. This is what supporting public education is about, so that everybody has that touchstone of neighborhood excellent public schools, no matter your background. This is not about pretending we're going to agree on everything. We don't have to, and we're not supposed to. This is about making sure we establish that at the end of the day, we all have an equal claim on the American project, and determining and uplifting that idea is the only hope that this country has. So if I got to pick one word, it's belonging. The format of our event here. I'm glad that you're here, and I appreciate your activism, but I really have to ask you to respect the format of our event. Go ahead.
So we're taking that questions out of the fishbowl. The next question is for Bill. And Bill, if this is your question, feel free to raise your hand. What, apart from supporting your campaign, would you ask each of us to do to strengthen trust within our society?
First of all, this is about making sure that so I'm sorry, but I really need to ask you to respect the format of this event. I'm sorry. I respect your activism.
You're saying solidarity, you're saying rules of the road, and you're not following them yourself. You don't love
Sometimes I respect your activism. I respect your activism, but sometimes love is not expressed by interruption. Sometimes love is expressed in different ways. I want you to hear that even if you support another candidate, I respect your belonging, I respect your rights, and I respect your activism. We're also in a room full of hundreds of people where it will only be possible for us to have a discussion if one person speaks at a time. So I'd like for us to have that where one person speaks at a time. Is that okay with you? Is it okay with you that one person speaks at a time? Is it okay with everybody else that one person speaks at a time? So, why don't you stick around and we'll have a conversation if time allows, okay? So, come on.
What, apart from supporting your campaign, would you ask each of us to do to strengthen our society?
So, you know what? Just go ahead. Let's do this. Go ahead. Go ahead. Not what's his name. His name is Eric Logan.
There's so many I can't keep track of.
That's false.
In Chicago, Gerald, I can name 50 other assumptions I have in Chicago. Eric Logan.
Please share your question so I can respond to
Logan
it.
was murdered by your community.
Please share your question so that I can respond to it.
You will show up. There are queer and trans people and people of color. When there were 8 community meetings in South Bend about a police officer killing one of your own community members, and you did not go to them.
So it's false
You
that...
missed 7 meetings
Right.
at your own community.
So your question is whether queer people can trust me if I did not attend, people can color, can't trust me if I did not attend every community meeting related to policing that we set up, right? Right, so we created those meetings in order to make, actually let me back up so everybody knows what we're talking about here. Last year we lost a member of our community. His name is Eric Logan, and he lost his life in a shooting with a police officer. Now the police officer said he was attacked with a knife, but the body camera wasn't activated. For that reason, I called for an outside investigation into what happened in order to build trust. That outside investigation is still taking place. But we knew as a community, we couldn't wait for an investigation to take steps that would empower community members in order to be able to shape how our community is kept safe. Look, when you're a mayor, This is not something that you deal with in theory. This is not something that's just playing out on the news. This is not something we legislate. You have to figure out what to do on the ground. And what we knew was that a process that empowered community members would lead to greater trust and would lead to greater answers. So on issues like how the policy on the use of force in our police department is built, on issues like how we train officers, questions like how we recruit officers. One thing I've acknowledged publicly is the struggle we've had in our city to attract and retain applicants to the department, especially Black applicants who would be able to build trust in African American neighborhoods. And it's a whole set of other issues. Now, I have also found, especially becoming a presidential candidate, that when I turn up someplace, sometimes it attracts a certain amount of attention and coverage that can be distracting from the work that needs to be done. So, in initiating a series of community meetings that invited everybody from rank and file officers to elected leaders to activists, some of my harshest critics, and people who've been in the administration all along, we wanted the conversations to be real. We wanted them to lead to actual change that could be implemented. Even in my last few years as mayor, that could be implemented, some of them launched before I left. In order for that to happen, we had to have conversations that got out of the circus and into the heart. And so those conversations I knew would be at their best if they were as far away as possible from presidential politics. Now, I also didn't want to leave them completely alone, which is why I made sure to join one of the meetings. Without a lot of fanfare, I don't think we even advertised I was coming. Knowing there would be a chance to thank everybody who had come together in good faith to make the recommendations that helped change how policing worked in our city. So that's our story. And when you take steps to try to fix something, folks will criticize where you come up short. And I can't say that we got it perfect. We still have problems in our city. I imagine we have problems in every city when it comes to tearing down the walls of mistrust in particular between communities of color and police departments, but not only that particular pattern of mistrust. Because it is built on the pain and the exclusion and the harm and the violence that has led us to this point. And I'm not standing up here as I hope to earn your vote, saying that I have earned it by getting everything perfect, or that racism, poverty, homelessness, and exclusion have come to an end in my city during my time as mayor any more than they've come to an end anywhere, but we have made so much progress. The reason why we have the support that we do in South Bend, not 100%, of course I've got critics, but the reason I have the level of support, in particular, the reason why the strongest minority support that I have is from the people in South Bend, is because we have worked side by side in good faith and gotten results. And that's what we're going to have to do as a country. The president doesn't have any more of a magic solution than a mayor does, but there are concrete things that have to be done differently. Using the powers of the presidency to deliver greater justice, especially when it comes to issues around policing. And it matters who's in the White House. And I am asking voters to send in somebody who knows the good, the bad, and the ugly of what is at stake and what can be done in order to get these things done. I guess our time is up. I tried to be concise in my answers, but that one touched enough things that I had to unpack it a little bit. So I gather our time is up, but please give one more big thank you to Crystal for being our host. And I cannot thank you enough for being part of this effort. It's going to be messy. We are talking about the most vulnerable moment our republic has faced in our lifetimes. But I'm also so convinced, more convinced, after a year of campaigning, that there is a powerful American majority that wants the same things. And that's going to be really important in this season in particular. Because the moment we're in, this is the stretch, some would call it the end of the beginning, that is drawing us to that first caucus night. This is the moment that will bring out the heat of competition more than ever. And elbows will come out, and critiques will come out, and that's okay. But at the end of the day, we're going to get one nominee. And the 25 people who didn't get to be the nominee, and their supporters, are going to have to come together around the one who does, because we know what we are up against in this country, and it is not each other.